Welcome to AnyLogic 7 New Features Overview. These slides were prepared by Ilya Grigoryev and presented by Brian Wasson. AnyLogic 7 boasts new features, including an improved user interface, more support for agent-based modeling, improved space markup elements, a new process modeling library, a wider variety of 3D images, an improved pedestrian library, an improved rail library, and other improvements. You'll notice AnyLogic 7 has a new logo and a new splash screen. With the release of AnyLogic 7, keep in mind if you have current support services, there's no charge to upgrade to AnyLogic 7. If you've built models in AnyLogic 6, you can still run those models in AnyLogic 7. All of the functionality of AnyLogic 6 is still included in AnyLogic 7, in addition to new features. We also have tools to help you migrate your models to use AnyLogic 7's libraries and features. AnyLogic 7 will not override your installation of AnyLogic 6. You can keep both versions on the same workstation. All of the functionality that you've known in AnyLogic 6.9 is still included in AnyLogic 7, along with new improvements and capabilities. AnyLogic 7 still has a powerful, flexible, multi-method environment to build or combine agent-based, discrete event, and system dynamics modeling. It is a horizontal tool with support for verticals such as pedestrian, rail, health, and logistics. And it is written in Java to operate on Windows, Linux, or Mac. User interface. AnyLogic 7 has a new logo, new taskbar icons for both the model window and the simulation experiment, and the company logo remains. There are new splash screen graphics for each edition. There is a new welcome page where you can visit runthemodel.com, anylogic.com, our users group on LinkedIn, our training calendar, and our YouTube video channel. There's a new workspace layout for AnyLogic 7. In AnyLogic 6, the palette view was docked on the right, and the names of other palettes than the one currently selected took up valuable space, so that only a small amount of space was used to display current palette objects. In AnyLogic 7, the palette view has moved to the left. The palettes are now represented by a vertical ribbon of icons, with more space devoted to current palette objects. To navigate to a different palette, you can hover the mouse over the ribbon of palette icons, and the palette names will appear. You can select a new palette by icon or name. In AnyLogic 6, the Properties view was horizontal and docked at the bottom of the screen. Users constantly had to drag the view border up to increase the Properties view, or down to increase the Graphical Editor view. In AnyLogic 7, Properties are now docked on the right. It's now one page instead of multiple tabs, and sections can be expanded or collapsed. There are no longer separate tabs for dynamic properties. You can populate static values, dynamic values, and certain properties have to be switched between static or dynamic. The Problems view shows you how many errors exist. It can be shown or hidden, and you can choose to show this view only when errors exist. There is now more space for the Graphical Editor because properties have been moved to the right, and Problems and Console are hidden when not needed. AnyLogic 6 was designed for monitors with a 4:3 aspect ratio. AnyLogic 7 takes advantage of widescreen displays. Simulation windows are now also designed for widescreen displays. Graphical Editor. You can now hide categories of elements in the Graphical Editor, such as presentation shapes, space markup shapes, or system dynamics links. In the Trauma Center example, you can hide the presentation shapes by clicking on the Hide Presentation Shapes icon. Or click on the Hide Space Markup Elements icon to hide those elements. You can also choose to hide the System Dynamics links. Now your model window border shows up as a blue line in your Graphical Editor workspace, so you know exactly which items will appear in your simulation window. Improved usability. In AnyLogic 7, you can choose a target line, for example, from a drop-down list. Or, if you prefer, you can choose using the Graphical Editor selector instead of using the drop-down list. Event now allows you to simply select a unit of time instead of typing the time expression. Adding shapes to an existing group is now simpler. You can choose from a drop-down list or select a group icon in the Graphical Editor. There is improved code completion. In AnyLogic 6, oftentimes the first code completion options were useless or rarely used. In AnyLogic 7, more relevant choices appear first. Flowchart blocks connect automatically. You can control this feature in the preferences. You can create option lists, such as sex or marital status. Simply choose Projects, New Option List, enter your name, and specify the elements. And your option list will appear in your project tree. If you're trying to find just the right probability distribution for a particular property, click on the Probability Distribution wizard. There you will see a variety of distributions, information about each distribution, and the parameters to be populated. Once a distribution is selected and parameters are populated, click OK, and the property will be populated with the probability distribution expression. You can also have a custom distribution, which can be continuous, discrete, or they can use the option list created earlier. So when you created the option list for male and female, custom distribution allows you to set the corresponding percentages to 48% and 52%. And when these entities are created, they will reflect this custom distribution for male and female. Custom distribution can be discrete, as shown below. It can also be continuous, as shown here. And state charts have been improved so that each transition now displays its trigger type indicator, whether it is timeout, rate, condition, message, or agent arrival. And transitions which are not properly connected will now be shown in red. Enhanced support for agent-based modeling. Agents can be people, vehicles, things, and organizations. Entities can also be people, vehicles, or a variety of objects. And so can resources. This begs the question, what role does a truck, a container, or a doctor play in a model? They can be an agent, an entity, or a resource. With AnyLogic 7, the great merge comes about, where all of these displayed objects are now replaced by a single agent type. There is a wizard for creating agent populations. And an agent can follow a discrete event process as an entity, and also have changes in state or behavior as an agent. Here you see a container line model where ships are sailing between ports. You will notice the storm in the ocean can be turned on and off. And when the storm is turned on, a ship's speed will slow down and the ship will turn red when inside the storm zone. In order to accomplish this, an agent flows through a discrete event process as an entity and changes agent behavior. The agent is also the environment. There is no longer a separate environment element. There's a new API for agent communication shown here. There is a default contact network. Links are bidirectional by default, but can be made unidirectional. You can also define custom links between agents. Here is a model of connected agents randomly moving around in a defined space. Two types of connections are shown in the model. When the friends links are hidden, you will notice the remaining connections are formed based upon proximity of nearby agents. As agents move around, new links will form where agents get closer, and links will disappear as agents move further apart. If we hide the proximity connections and show the friends connections, you can see that these connections remain constant. And of course, both links are operating in the same model. Connections can be managed in a model using the functions below. There is also an API for custom links. There is also a link to an upper-level agent. You no longer need the get_main function. You can now reference main simply by main. Inheritance is visually supported. So for example, a bus agent can inherit parameters and state charts from an upper agent vehicle. And the upper agent attributes cannot be altered at the lower level agent workspace. Space markup. There is now one unified 3D coordinate space. Space markup options now include paths, nodes, attractors, and palette racks, so you no longer use rectangles and polylines from the presentation palette. For pedestrian modeling, you can use walls, target lines, surfaces with queues or waiting areas, and virtual pathways. And for rails, you can use rail tracks and positions on tracks. Using the space markup elements, you can create a detailed floor for pedestrians, curved track segments, and auto-created switches, and auto-connecting network elements for processes and agents. The trauma center space markup created in AnyLogic 6 required lots of little rectangles every place paths crossed. In AnyLogic 7, those rectangles are no longer needed. Instead, point nodes are created where paths or nodes meet to form a network. Networks are automatically created when paths, nodes, or pallet racks are connected together. Rectangular nodes, polygonal nodes, and point nodes define a location where agents reside in a network. Read the next few slides for help with drawing paths. AnyLogic 7 allows you to convert network shapes from previous versions to the new space markup. Just select the network shapes, right-click, and select Convert to Network Elements. There is a new API for moving agents. Movement functions now utilize elements from the new space markup, such as attractors and nodes. Process Modeling Library. There is a new discrete event modeling library, which allows for pull or push entity flow, more flexible resource management, and graphical state charts on entities. In the past, you might have encountered an error because an entity was unable to leave the out port. This happens in a push process when a queue is full. AnyLogic 7 introduces pull entity flow, in which the entities will wait at the current object if the next block in the sequence cannot accept them. Blocks supporting the pull protocol include source, enter, delay, pickup, drop-off, seize, batch, unbatch, and combine. You can control forced pushing with a checkbox in a block's properties. In AnyLogic 7, you no longer need to choose between regular resources and network resources. Now there is one unified resource block that no longer needs to be visually connected to process blocks. To create a custom resource type, drag resource type onto the main workspace and select Options in the wizard. And that resource type will be created as a new agent. Each entity can now have behaviors controlled by a state chart on its agent workspace. Seize and release blocks can now have preparation or wrap-up processes. You can also define alternative resource sets, which may be selected when your preferred resource set is not available. You can decide on a number of task preemption policies when a resource becomes unavailable. Choose from no preemption, wait for the original resource, terminate service, seize any resource, or continue without the resource. Within the resource pool, you can now model failures and repairs. And repair can be a delay or an additional flowchart process. You can also model breaks for resources. And you can model maintenance of resources. The maintenance can be modeled as a delay or a flowchart process. And you can model other tasks such as a meeting that occurs. AnyLogic 7 has new warehouse storage capabilities, which result in up to 5 times performance improvement in models. 3 rack topologies are now supported: 1 rack 1 aisle, 1 rack 2 aisles, and 2 racks 1 aisle. And vertical levels are now animated in 3D. You can now create multi-deep pallet racks by specifying the number of positions deep. You can have gravity flow racks by specifying the direction of flow on the pallet rack. Conveyors now have a more physical connection between conveyors. In a second conveyor, simply specify how to grab entities from the previous conveyor. For animation involving conveyors, place the right side of your entity against the 0, 0 axis instead of centering the entity on it. AnyLogic 7 has more queuing disciplines, including first in, first out, last in, first out, priority-based, and comparison of some attribute of each entity. Instead of selecting only 2 or 5 output paths, you can now specify any number of output paths using a select output in and a set of select output out blocks, which do not need to be graphically connected. To convert process blocks from previous versions to new process blocks in AnyLogic 7, select the process blocks, right-click, and convert them to the new library. If you find resulting errors after this conversion which you're unable to troubleshoot, feel free to use the Get Support button from AnyLogic's menu for help. "3D animation." AnyLogic 6 had both a presentation palette for 2D and a 3D palette for 3D. AnyLogic 7 has one presentation palette in which shapes default to both 2D and 3D. Text defaults, however, are still 2D only. You can also use different shapes to represent the same object in the 2D versus 3D views. AnyLogic 7 includes a wider collection of 3D objects in its library. You can also change the color of existing 3D library objects. To create animated 3D objects, create multiple views of the same object, then use a condition to control visibility of each view of the object. All paths are in 3D, whether a rail track, conveyor, or road. There are predefined light types such as street light, car headlight, daylight, and moonlight. Now I will show you how easy it is to begin building models with AnyLogic 7. Let's open a new model. Now let's change to the Process Modeling library and drag a source and then a queue. You will notice that the object blocks auto-connect when placed near each other. Now let's add a conveyor and a sink. At the bottom of the Process Modeling library are space markup elements, so we can add a rectangular node where the entities will accumulate for the queue. And let's drag a path onto the workspace. We can double-click on the path to add an additional point and move that around. If we want to split the path into two shapes, we can right-click on the path and select Split into two shapes and choose the point where we want to split the path. Now the path has been split into two paths. And we can place the paths adjoining again and double-click to remove the point and make them one path again. We can also turn the path into a conveyor path by selecting it in the properties. Now we want to associate the space markup elements with the process blocks. For the queue, we can select the rectangular node for entity location using the Graphical Editor selector from the Queue's Properties tab. And for the conveyor block, let's choose the path for entity location using the drop-down list or the Graphical Editor selector. And now let's run the model using the green arrow in the top menu. And you will see the default entities, which are colorful circles, appear in the queue and move across the conveyor in the model. Now let's change the entity from the colorful circles to some other entity. Drag entity type onto the workspace. This will open a wizard. Now choose another item, such as a closed box, to represent each entity. you will notice that a new agent is created called MyEntity, and you can see the workspace associated with that agent. But let's go back to main. Now if we click on the source block, we have the option to, in the source block properties, change new entity from the default agent to MyEntity, which represents our closed box. So now let's run the model. And the colorful dots, or default entities, have been replaced by closed boxes. Let's change to the MyEntity workspace. Zoom in on the closed box image. Click on the image and increase the size to 300%. And go back to main and click on the path for conveyor and increase that width to 20. And let's run the model again to see the larger cardboard boxes accumulating in the queue and moving across the conveyor. Now let's add a 3D window. Select the presentation palette and drag 3D window onto the main workspace. And pay attention to the blue border, which displays the extent of the simulation experiment window. So now you see the closed boxes in 3D as well accumulating in the queue and moving across the conveyor. Highly improved pedestrian library. AnyLogic 7 has a highly improved pedestrian library. There's an improved performance, a richer pedestrian markup space, more compact flowcharts, and zero coding required. The pedestrian library can be used to model transportation stations, airports, malls, amusement parks, and event venues such as concert halls or worship facilities. Since each pedestrian is modeled as an individual object, features can be applied individually, whether it be individual target lines or customer attributes such as first class or economy passengers or countries of citizenship. AnyLogic 7 provides a more efficient pedestrian library than AnyLogic 6. Ped area, ped services, ped attractor, ped flow statistics, and ped density map legend have been substituted with space markup shapes. Ped tie, ped command goto, Ped command wait, ped command queue, and ped command service have been completely removed. And ped configuration and ped ground are no longer needed. Areas, walls, pathways, queues, pedestrian density maps, linear service, and target lines are some of the space markup elements in pedestrian modeling. You can have walls which are straight, rectangular, or circular to represent working areas or columns. Surfaces with lines or with waiting areas can be used in pedestrian models. With group behavior in services, one member of the group may be getting the service on behalf of the other members of the group. You can have stairs, escalators, roads, and floors using ped area descriptor or ped change ground. Here you see an escalator demo using AnyLogic's Pedestrian library. You will notice 4 camera views along the bottom of the display, followed on the right by a slider bar, which can be used to control the speed of the escalator. And here is a pedestrian model using sloped ped area descriptors from multiple camera views. Attractors, or arrays of attractors, can define individual waiting points. This pedestrian model utilizes an array of attractors to define waiting points for each pedestrian. Virtual corridors are created by defining the width of a path at various points along that path. The pedestrian density map will highlight areas of increasing pedestrian traffic over time. Pedestrian flow statistics lines can be used to measure the number of pedestrians moving in a direction across its corresponding line. You can convert pedestrian models from previous versions by selecting the presentation elements of the model, right-clicking, and then choose Convert to Walls. Similarly, you can select the pedestrian flow blocks from previous versions and right-click and choose Convert to New Library. New Rail Library. There is a new rail library in AnyLogic 7 which can be used for classification yards, repair facilities, railway stations, subways, and airport shuttle trains. In AnyLogic 6, One previously had to draw tracks, then go back and draw switches using circles, and it was important that each switch had to contain exactly 3 track endpoints. In AnyLogic 7, railway tracks are connected and switches appear automatically. The graphical elements of a track have been improved and now allow for curved tracks. "3D railways are automatically built along with the 2D railway in AnyLogic 7. There is a larger collection of railcars included in AnyLogic 7. Miscellaneous. AnyLogic 7 has new system dynamics healthcare models. Months and years have been added as options for model time units. A model can be easily attached when contacting support using the Get Support button. Within the Java editor, collapsible sections are an option along with line numbers. You can create a customizable model report by selecting the model from the project view and choose Tools and Create Documentation. You can choose to only include certain report elements, such as presentation, space markup, or controls, and a PDF is created. Any graphical element can be captured as an image for use in external applications such as Word. A triangular average variability probability distribution function has been added so that by simply defining the average and the variability, you can get the resulting triangular distribution. There is an improved API for schedule initialization on startup. AnyLogic Help contains all element functions. AnyLogic has a new standard training program combining the best exercises from 2 previous courses. Thank you. If you have any additional questions, don't hesitate to email Derek@anylogic.com.